Right, it is 6 p.m. and I will call this work session to order. Tonight we have two items on our agenda. The first is a presentation on proposed changes to the revised expanded multifamily project for 5665 Foxridge / 5700 Broadmoor with Block Real Estate Services LLC. I believe Laura, you're up first on this one.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I believe in February, representatives from Block were here to talk with you about plans to expand their project that had previously been approved for 5665 Foxridge to include acquisition of the 5700 Broadmoor office tower, demolition, and construction of some additional multifamily units. Since that meeting, they have encountered some challenges with antennas on the roof of the 5700 Broadmoor building. They've been working and looking at some other options, so they're here tonight to kind of share what they've been doing since we talked with them in February and kind of what the proposed project from their perspective might look like going forward. So okay, so I'd like to introduce Will Block to kind of walk you through that. You all had, the February presentation was in your packet. The current iteration of the project was uploaded and Justin has that and can walk through as you present.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Will Block. I'm Vice President of Development with Block Real Estate Services. We're back before you tonight with an update on some changes to our overall scope of our project here at 57th and Broadmoor. I'll try to not be as repetitive as I can be here since we were here about a month or two ago. But through this discussion, I'll remind everybody where we are, what we proposed originally, what we have approved next door, and then what we changed and why we changed it. You can flip next slide. Thanks. So quick reminder here, Green Box is the site that we currently have under contract at 5700 Broadmoor, and the orange box is the project that we currently have approved with the city for 289 units that we call 56 Foxridge. We're here along the east side of Metcalf with our 56 Foxridge project essentially fronting along Metcalf. Zoom in here just as another quick reminder of what we have approved today at 56 Foxridge. It's 289 units with a center courtyard style construction entry on the west side of the project towards Metcalf and street level activation on the north and east side of the building that we work through with this body to have approved. Quick reminder of the project or the site rather that we have under contract right now. It's the existing 5700 Broadmoor office building. That building is over 80% vacant, increasing towards 90% over the next couple of months. As we discussed last time, we think it's no longer feasible as an office building. And so we were told about the sale of that asset late last year, and we figured it might make sense as we struggled internally with our financial modeling. We're trying to bridge that gap to financial feasibility to see if expanding our project southward would allow us to start that project sooner and do a great overall master plan for that area. Core objectives for that is to bring living to the north of Johnson Drive corridor to support that retail out there, and then also to make that original project and the additional project more financially feasible. So this site plan is what we discussed last time that we were here. This was our original concept, how we would lay out that site to the south and how that would fit together with our approved project at 56 Foxridge on the north side of the building, on the north side of that parcel. You can see a precast garage is what I was looking for. That would be built off site. Those pieces would be constructed off site and brought to the site and then assembled there in place, which would allow that garage to support parking at a much more affordable rate as compared to trying to fit that parking in that hill underneath the building, which is extremely expensive. It's about the most expensive type of parking structure that you can do. So you see that parking on the north side of this 5700 Broadmoor site, as well as how we originally planned to lay out that building, that concept for the new construction with a 2 courtyard style project activation on the east side of that garage, as well as all the way southward towards 57th on the south end of the site, and then a southern facing courtyard that was visible from the street but not accessible from the street. So as Laura mentioned, we ran into some trouble as we went through the advanced levels of diligence on the building. It's tough to see from the street, but when you get up there on the roof of the building, you can see there's quite an amalgamation of cell tower equipment, radio repeaters, and other types of antenna up there that were originally put on the roof to support leases back in the late 90s and early 2000s for then Sprint and T-Mobile. Those rooftop rights, and forgive me, I was learning about this through that process. Those rooftop rights can be purchased by other companies for upfront payments, at which point those companies step in as a landlord for those rooftop tenants. And so that occurred several building owners ago, back in 2014. And what happened was this company came in and purchased the rooftop cell tower rights for a 50-year period with a 50-year extension. So essentially in perpetuity. On a building like this that, as we discussed, we think is no longer feasible as an office building, that essentially leaves the product as a what we call a cell tower with an office building beneath it, and there's not much we can do about it. So we, spent as much time as we could and brought in some legal experts to try to figure out if there's anything we could do about that. We talked to the company that came in and purchased those rooftop rights. What we discovered was they're not willing to do a buyout of those rights anymore. We talked about it. It was very expensive, but they are willing to move to another building. However, there would be a large upfront payment for them to do that site research, and it would take years to do that. So at the current rate that I think we had mentioned last time of several tens of thousands of dollars every month to keep this building up and operating as an office building at its current level of vacancy, we were kind of stuck with this issue, and we went back to the drawing board. So what we did was we challenged our architects and yeah.
Remind me again what you thought, in addition to how long the research for tower relocation would take. The annual cost was in excess of $1 million a year.
So yeah, there's several possible pathways forward. The first pathway is you move those antenna off the building into what's called a cell on wheels, COW. That would be upwards of millions of dollars a year to have that on site to support their cell tower equipment while the building is demoed and then built back up. And then potentially, if our building fits their criteria, they would move that back up, which would be an additional cost. There's also the additional layer of cost of where if T-Mobile or whatever carrier does not want to have no service, they have to basically purchase 2 tower equipment sets and put one up while the other one is up and then take it down. So there's all kinds of weird layers of costs, but the most likely path forward, which was the other option, was to move it to another building. The issue with that was it would require an upfront payment to them to do site research, and they've told us directly, which it took some time to get that answer, that it takes typically years for that search process. They do a structural evaluation of the building, they make sure it works, they talk to their tenants, the tenants run their own kind of research, and then to move that off of the building and then up on the other building would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the time and the cost to do that are very excessive. And that is if they agree to move to another building, which we're not sure will happen. And then there's the other layer of the building owner that we would move to would have to agree to their terms of their lease.
Did you know this when you purchased the property?
So when we purchased the property, we were aware of cell tower leases, but we did not know the extent or the inability to remove those leases. This is the most severe cell tower lease that we've ever seen. So we've gone through most avenues of potential ways to get rid of that lease or those lease rights, and this is essentially the end of that road.
And they have not yet actually purchased the building. So they're in their due diligence period. And this is one of the last remaining pieces, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So our original diligence period has been extended as these things have been uncovered. Some of these things I think we knew, and some of these things I think the existing building owner and us were finding out at the same time. So we've extended that sort of piecemeal along the way, with this meeting being one of our last hurdles. And so that's extended for a bit more time while we figure this out. But that's the issue we ran into while we're up against our original proposal. And so what we did was we challenged our architects and our engineers to redesign and reimagine the site in a way that would support us keeping those 2 buildings in place in the form of an adaptive reuse project. And so this next slide gives an outline of what that would look like. So very similar idea to what our previous proposal included. That garage is in the same place. We maintain that east activation of that garage on the street frontage there. But those two, or I guess that single tower there in the center is actually retrofitted for multifamily use. It can accommodate almost 160 units, 159 units in the building. And so we revised that center of the project to accommodate keeping those buildings, and then kept that same idea of that southern facing U-shaped building with the courtyard that's visible from the street there to the south. Some benefits of this reimagined site plan is that it has a lot more green space. We were able to layer in a lot more grassy areas. The previous plan was mostly filling that site with units as we tried to make it as efficient as possible. And this allowed for us to do things like a dog park and then some additional areas to pull in and access that project off of Broadmoor there to the east. Additionally, that garage originally on the previous proposal only had one access point, and we were kind of thinking through how we would lay that out. This is much more efficient. It makes sense. You can pull into the site and access that garage via 3 entrances now. And so we think this layout's much better in that capacity. It allows for.
Can you clarify where the entrances are? Sorry.
Yeah, so you'll see there where that cursor is, there's one there on the east side of the garage and then the south side of the garage via this drive lane. That drive lane did not exist in the previous plan. So if you'll compare those two, that is new. And that allows for guest parking and temporary resident parking, and people who are coming in to tour units and things like that as well, which we really like. We maintain that same street level activation on the southern U that we had previously discussed, and that is going to mimic what was worked through with the previous councils over the years to get that approved. And so that's still evident there on the east side of the garage and the east side of the southern U. And then we have relocated that clubhouse for that southern half of the project to the northeast corner of that southern U. So that clubhouse will sit in between the south end of those two towers and the building to the south.
In your previous plan that we saw in February, the purple on the east side of the garage, excuse me, had been the clubhouse and sort of some common space areas. And that is now reflected as townhomes.
So on the east side of the garage on the previous plan, that had been several floors of wrap units. So those
Okay.
are just normal units.
Normal apartment units. Okay.
What we've done on this plan is we've made those units more of a townhome structure. So they could be 2-story units that are all in one with a staircase inside the unit. We've done that on some other projects in some of our more urban areas, and it's been pretty popular. And so we would bring those types of units to the east side of the garage instead of normal units that are on that face of the garage.
So they'd be like stacked townhomes, like 2 stories above 2 stories?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Right. Yeah. And they would have the same sort of walkout front door feel to the street. And I actually have a picture of that at the end of this that you can see what that looks like. And then, yes, that clubhouse was originally sort of in the middle where those towers are on the east side of the project. And it's moved just a little bit south to the northeast corner of that. This will show you where that clubhouse is located and answer that question directly. That yellow box there, so the left slice is the ground floor, the middle slice is the second floor, and the right slice is the upper floors. So on the left side of the page, you can see where that clubhouse is located and how you access that clubhouse from the east, as well as some of those ground level connections and sidewalks and things like that. And then the center plane here, the center slice, shows how those sky bridges that we intend to incorporate would connect the garage to the southern 2 buildings. So that garage would be connected via a covered walkway, elevated walkway, where you could enter the existing towers from that new garage and then pass through those towers to the clubhouse and southern building to the south.
And connection to the north building is ground floor only? Is that?
The connection to the northern building is there. It's a little bit hard to see in the middle there.
Yeah.
On the northwest corner of that.
Oh, I
garage.
see. There is a skywalk
Yeah,
as well.
so
Okay.
you can stay inside from essentially the north all the way to the south.
Gotcha.
Okay. Wanted to give you an example of what one of those floors in that adaptive reuse might look like, just so you can imagine with us how we would fit our units into the existing office building. The building lays out pretty well for this type of use. You know, the main concern when you do this type of project is how do you get light from the outside of the building into the units as deep as possible. The W style shape, if you will, of the building really helps us to do that. And then the elevator core here on the southwest corner of the building, those elevators are fairly new. And so that was a great thing to find out when we started doing diligence on in the bottom left corner here. Yeah, I don't have the cursor there. There you go. Right. So there's 4 elevators in the building. Some of the utilities and overall mechanical aspects of the building some make sense and some don't make sense for this type of use, but it's great to have some checks on those boxes as you do your diligence, and it's in fairly good shape for its age. So one of the things I wanted to talk about here is there's essentially 2 paths forward from this place on whether we would pursue, and this building would qualify due to its age, historic tax credits, or whether we would not pursue historic tax credits. If we pursue historic tax credits, there's much more oversight on what we can and cannot do to the building. The outside of the building, for example, couldn't really change at all. There's several things inside and several types of adaptive reuse projects you would typically do that you wouldn't be able to do if you did that those historic tax credits. And so we could go that route, or we could also go the route where we essentially reskin the whole building, bring in potentially Juliet-style balconies, and make it more of a multifamily purpose structure. So we're not ready to commit to either of those pathways yet, but just wanted to mention that as something we're going through right now. We've had several meetings with our construction team over the past few weeks, and we're figuring out those plans right now.
Of the ceilings are coming into question around the historical tax, or
so yeah, right now it's obviously an office building, and so there's a lot of drop ceilings that you would see in that type of use. The floor-to-floor height of the actual floor plates themselves are very good. There's a lot of height in that building. In order to fit that into the requirements of historic tax credits, it's doable. It's just a little bit more difficult. You have to do some things where the ceiling meets the outside of the building. So essentially, the thought process is how you see the inside of the building from the outside. So you might have to do a type of soffit, and then similar to this room, come up from there if you wanted to increase those heights inside the units. So typically our BRES standard of unit has a higher ceiling, about 9 feet, compared to some of our competitors. And so that would be one of the more attractive things of doing a non-historic tax credit project, or working hard to figure out how to accommodate the requirements they have for that.
what do you see as your timeline on that piece? Because I assume that's going to impact the pro forma and what you might be asking for in incentives and everything. So where do you see that historic tax credit determination
Sure.
fitting into the process?
So we had in the last week our meeting with our general contractor that we're working with to sort of evaluate the costs of the reskin options and things like that, and how we would reuse the building, and a new cooling tower and things like that they've been looking at, and they've done several tours. I think over the next week or so, we would make a lot of decisions related to that. Part of that is due to the fact that we are under contract on this site, so we don't own it yet, and we have to make those calls sort of in good faith to determine if we want to move forward and pursue this plan. And so part of that is this discussion here tonight with everybody. And so we'll take everything into account over the next week for sure and make a lot of those decisions up front. But the true decision on which path forward we take will take a few weeks probably.
Can I go back just for a second on this, the cell tower?
Yeah.
The owner of the building, the current owner of the building, does he own or lease that?
The owner of the building is the landlord for the property.
Okay.
He is the landlord for all the tenants in the normal floors of the building.
Okay.
There's a structure that this company comes in and does where they essentially buy the rights to the rooftop and a small supply closet for their equipment.
Okay.
And they are the landlord for all of those tenants on the roof. So the original landlord actually cannot talk directly to, in this case, T-Mobile, without going through this new landlord that came in and purchased those rights.
Okay, so it's not leased. The actual physical cell tower information is not leased by anybody, right? It's owned by that one landlord. Is that correct? It's confusing because
Sure.
if they're selling the business, why can't they just resublet the lease or whatever?
Yeah.
Sure, happy to, and appreciate being back in front of you. Aaron Messmer, Block Real Estate Services. So in that scenario, what the building owner did is they said, we no longer own the roof. We will take a one-time upfront payment and we will sell the rooftop to someone else. And so they sold the rooftop to someone else. And that someone else now is the landlord of T-Mobile or any of the other cell tower carriers that have the rooftop leases up there. So the group that we are buying the building from doesn't control what happens on the roof. And in order to affect any change that would impact the roof, including tearing the building down, you would have to get the consent not only of the rooftop owner, but of their tenants as well. So it's a multi-party issue.
So do you have to go through an approval process with T-Mobile and whoever owns that to buy this property?
No, but we are not allowed to infringe on their rights related to the roof either. Right? It's the same way that if you lease a space from Laura and I buy the building from Laura, you still have the right to lease that space. Right? Your lease doesn't go away if I buy her building.
And you're calling them the rooftop owner, but they actually have this 50+50 lease,
have
so
a-
they're effectively
There's
the
100
owner.
lease,
Yeah.
Right. They have effectively bought the rights to the rooftop for 100 years. Right. So they kind of own the roof. And then they make money by really two ways. One is subleasing space to these, cell tower carriers. And the other maybe obstructing things like this where they can get paid. So there's that. But the reality is it makes it so that we really can't do anything with the rooftop. We don't have rights to it. Neither does the current building owner. So they have fee title to the ground and the building and everything else, but those rooftop rights have been stripped out.
So based on that cost and based on the complication with who owns and who, are you having second thoughts about purchasing the building? I mean, I
We-
know you've had all these renditions, but
The only way that we could buy the building is if we plan to keep the building. Right? So that's when we talk about the path forward, you can't buy the building and tear it down. The rooftop lease, master lease, and subsequent subleases make the tear down of the building impossible. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because they want to get paid an extraordinary amount of money to do that if they were to go away. But the other, and I think Laura, you were getting at this point earlier, is that if that process takes 3 years and the building is 100 and something thousand feet and it's $10 a foot to carry that building a year, by the time you do utilities, taxes, insurance, cleaning, so forth, you're gonna spend $1.5 million a year for 3 years to carry a building. You're gonna spend $4.5 million to figure out if you're allowed to pay them another $1.5 million so they'll move. And now you're dead, right? You've drowned in the whole thing. So what we found is we can either pursue a plan that includes renovating the building, or we're going to drop the deal. Those are the options that we have right now. And that's the decision tree. And then within the decision tree is if we do renovate the building, like Will was saying, do you do historics or do you do something where you're not bound by that? And by the way, there's a couple things inside of that in addition to ceiling heights and things like that, may or may not leave us any choice. So when we haven't talked to the State Historic Preservation Office yet. I need the feedback from you to have that conversation. But if the State Historic Preservation Office says, hey, we go back to site plan, please, there you go. If they say, hey, by adding the deal on the south, you've changed the material character of the building exterior, then you're not eligible anymore, which means, okay, we're going to reskin it. Right, we're gonna redo the building. You can take the old glass out. You can put new glass in. Ceiling heights don't matter. You can make it look however you want. However, you lose the ability to access those historic credits. If they say no, you're eligible, then you have the ability to access those historic credits, which offset the additional cost of renovating a historic building. In order to keep it, first of all, to renovate the tower is more expensive than to knock it down and build new. So I know that some people don't understand that, but if you think about building something in the air, you can do whatever you want. You can make it as efficient as possible. You can set it up how you want. And by the way, we're building with wood. We're not building with steel and concrete, so it's less expensive. In this case, you are confined to their box. You have to live with their mechanical systems. You have to live with their skin. You have to live with their windows. And the windows in this case are not efficient, right? So you have to try to figure out a way to treat those. And then like Will said, you got to build a soffit and then you can raise the ceiling. So that's a different thing than just building a new ceiling. You have to figure out where the mechanical is going to go. Sometimes you're losing units for that, right? So done several historic projects. It's more expensive to build within a shell than it is to build a new shell. And that's why the historic tax credit program exists. Also, to be clear, the historic tax credits would come from, the federal or state credits. They don't come from the city or take out any any money. Those are just issued by them, and then you sell those for equity in the project. But the idea is those credits help to offset that additional expense that's related to those historic developments.
Wanda, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. It seems to me there was some discussion about asbestos. Does that still pertain?
If you tear the building down, you have to do full remediation. If you leave the building, there are different ways that you can
Fix it.
encapsulate and leave some of that stuff there, or you can fully remediate. And that's a question that's probably a future item to vet in terms of what you would want, what you'd prefer, and where that asbestos is. There are times when if it's like the spray-on fireproofing on a steel girder, you might leave that there because you're putting it under a drywall ceiling. It's not friable. It's not in the air. No one cares.
Yeah.
You're never going to touch it again. And there are other places where if it's in the mastic on the floor, you got to pull it up. You got to get it out.
Well, now the next question I have is, who maintains that roof then? Does the person that owns it maintain that roof?
There's an agreement. There's a bucket of rights. There's obligations on both parties
Oh, both of them?
related to how that works.
Oh, really? Hmm.
Yeah.
Very convenient.
I had a question about the SHPO piece. And you're talking about the windows because I'm only familiar. I previously served on the Westwood Hills Planning Commission. And they have their historic district. And I know at least on the residential side, SHPO's really worked up about windows and not letting you change anything about windows. And I didn't know if that carries over on the commercial or if you guys aren't that far into the process yet.
It 100% carries over, and when you do anything historic, there's a dialogue between
Yeah.
SHPO and the developer, and you really have to work well together, right? Like there's no room for us to come in and say, hey, we're doing this or whatever, and they have the same thing, right? They're trying to preserve history, they're
Yeah.
trying to preserve historic assets, and they're doing that in a way that a lot of times still has to lend itself to some sort of practical result, right? And so there are ways where, like Will was saying, you can achieve the same look from the street at the ceiling. The ceiling height today is 8 feet in the office, and they want that look to be that way from the street. You bring that 8 feet in 4 feet, then you set the soffit up and you go back, right? So maybe we end up with the same looking glass, but it's something that's a little more efficient, energy efficient, because you also balance historic versus energy efficiency.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going,
Sustainability,
where I was
right?
going
And so
next. Yeah.
how do you get this without that? And there's a conversation and there's a lot of compromises that have to be made with that. The other one that I think is a major point that we literally just sent the email to staff today to that is within those, can we go back to the one that has the bigger floor plan? There's 2 staircases here. And you can see the location of those staircases in terms of where they are in the building.
Mhm.
We need the city of Mission to tell us that works. If the city comes back and says you have to tack on a 3rd stairwell, which normally in this case is going to mean you have to adhere one to the outside of the building in some way, you're going to lose the historic credits anyway, right? So there's a negotiation with SHPO. There's also a conversation with the city, making sure that you're comfortable with how that's. You're going to be probably more okay, right? You're less flammable as a structure than a wood structure, like generally with you guys. Because if you're not, you can blow the whole historic thing wide open as well. So my point in all of that is just to say there's like 500 different things that are vetted, obviously, if we're going to go down that path. But the main question that we have, and if you support the concept, do you support it enough to extend the TIF district from the existing 56 Foxridge project down the street here? So that's the feedback that we're looking for. If you do, we'll keep pursuing it. We'll keep moving it forward. If you don't, we're going to drop the contract. That's, like I said, that's decision number 1. And then decision number 2 is if we keep going, do we go historic, not historic? How do we work through the
An extension of the
iterations?
TIF plan would have applied to your prior expanded concept that you showed us a little while back as well, right?
Same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Debbie?
Okay, it's come to complex work. So then you looked at this as an extension. If you don't get this, does that mean you can't make the other one work as well? Because I was under the impression you couldn't make that work. I don't know if it was fiscally or.
Yeah, so right now, and I think Will said it earlier, the most expensive kind of parking you can do is put it under the ground in a podium structure. And by bringing it out of the ground in a precast structure, right? One is poured in place concrete. You're actually pouring, and you have to raise the level of the garage up, because
Are
if
you
you
talking
look
about
at
the initial one?
yeah, phase one, you had a much higher height because you have the pool that drops down in the middle of the courtyard, right? So you can't park underneath that if it's too low, that kind of thing. So you have to have a higher garage. You have to pour it in place. That's a much more expensive process. So those stalls on a per parking space are very expensive. By moving this to a place where we can do a precast garage that would service both properties, you get more economies of scale by serving both properties, and you reduce the cost per stall. It's not free, but you're going to save some money, whether that's 5,000 per space or 10,000 per space. It gets you closer to being viable. Right now, the 56 Foxridge original phase one project is not viable. We're trying to figure out ways to get that. And even with the incentives, we're outside the strike zone. The strike zone gets bigger and smaller depending on where we are in the capital markets. It used to be bigger, right? We used to be able to build to call it a 6.25%, 6.5% return on cost. And today that number to attract institutional capital is 7%. And this project is probably phase one without doing phase two or any of this other stuff is probably in the low fives, maybe to mid fives. And so we need to figure out a way to pull that up to a place where we can get institutional funding.
So the answer is no, you could not build the first one based on the credentials or criteria that you just.
Right. So some of that is if we want to do the first class finishes that I came here and told you we would do a couple of years ago, then to do what that project entails today, no, we're not in the strike zone. Could we trim up some of the quality? Does the strike zone get bigger if interest rates move or the capital markets change? You know, the idea would be that we would continue to fight for that and over time figure out when the moment hit where we could move forward.
And what's the marketability of a complex like you indicated without a swimming pool?
We wouldn't build one. Yeah, it's not going to happen. So that's not a first class deal. Yeah.
Josepha, does he hear?
Yes. I'm gonna shout at the microphone. Okay. I want to bring up a discussion that came up when we talked to you on February 4th, around the location of the clubhouse in
Yeah.
proximity to the park. There was some concern about noise pollution and just kind of general disruption to the park with it moving further south, and I assume to the west. That is no longer do we feel like that's still going to be something that, Debbie, I guess your residents are going to be most concerned about?
Our clubhouse is usually fully enclosed glass. There's not a lot of noise transfer in or out. So if you're in our fitness studio doing your, spin class, with the instructor, you're not going to hear what's happening in the park. They're not going to hear you. So I don't think that's a concern, but the clubhouse here continues to be oriented to the Broadmoor side. We want it to be facing Broadmoor. We know that Broadmoor activation was a big priority for this body the last time we were here. And so keeping that glass looking that way, orienting ourselves that way, is still part of the plan. Yeah. And if you look, the visitor parking lot is kind of right there in front of it, on the east side along Broadmoor, so that whether it's your Amazon truck or your potential future residents or anybody like that coming to see you, that's where they're coming in and out. Yeah.
So is a phase one development plan that has gone through the council,
Correct.
is it going to be null and void if you don't get this building?
No, the plan still exists. We still have the approvals and we still have the development agreement with the city. So it's not null and void. It's just going to take longer to get done.
Yeah, and their TIF clock will start running, which will also impact the feasibility potentially.
I think we're set up where the TIF clock doesn't start until we build the project, but
Is it when the build? Okay. I thought I saw 2030 somewhere. No.
thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm still
Yep.
confused on it. Can it work or not?
Today, if you ask them to build it today, no, they would tell you, no, it's not financially feasible. But that's part of why we built the first plan that they brought forward, was to give themselves time to look at the design, which is what they've been doing, which is their preliminary costs on that podium parking are coming in. So now they're looking at kind of other options. But we stretched that path to get to actual construction out longer than we have on some of our other projects for just that reason. So I think what you're hearing Mr. Messmer say is, if you ask me to do it today, no, we wouldn't do it today. But that could change, and is still within the window that the development agreement that we have in place is valid and active.
there's a lot of things that factor into viability, and some of those are related to the financial markets, right? You guys are experiencing some of that today with everything that's going on at national level. Interest rates have moved very rapidly over the last 30 days for obvious reasons. Inflation is at risk, right? So you've got some of those pressures there. Construction costs are a big factor. Those go up and down. Rates go up and down. And then you have lease rates, right? So when you don't have new supply, a lot of times rental rates go up. Well, if rental rates rise, that will make the project more viable as well. So there's a whole host of factors that go into that model. When we work with Laura and the consultants that you guys have, we're looking at all those things. Today, you put all those things in the soup and it doesn't work, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be in that same spot forever. It just means that we're going to keep working on it till we figure it out.
Ben?
We own the property there. We're not going away on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think when you guys came to us with the phase 2 initially, I said something along the lines of, I wish you would have brought this from the start because I liked it that much. I'm just going to repeat myself here. This is adaptive reuse. It's an existing structure we don't have to knock down. It's more green space. It's better parking access. I like the townhome concept as just a variety of housing stock. I'm sure it's caused you some stress and the financials are difficult, right? But I'm not seeing anything to be sad about here. So that's where I stand.
Yeah. Yeah, I would kind of echo that. I like the project. I like the adaptive reuse. This is just a matter of personal aesthetics, but I think those buildings are that building is kind of ugly. So, I mean, when you're weighing the SHPO versus non-SHPO, I mean, I understand if there is a cost benefit to going the SHPO route, but I like the idea of improving the exterior, of that building, all other things being equal, but.
Actually made it to your townhome slide. Want to just go to that last one? I mean, I think one of the things when we've talked with them is it definitely changes the character of the project overall in terms of the variety, which is something that I know we've struggled with on other projects, long expanses, some of those kinds of things. So this really breaks it up, not only with green space, but different building types and phases. But I think ones on the bottom are your project. You want to talk?
That's at 44th and Washington, just north of the Country Club Plaza. So we built that project several years ago. Also attempted to address the street there, make sure that we have units where residents can walk right out. Those are some of our most popular units. So they're very well liked and people love it. They don't have to take their dog through the hallway to get out of the building. They can go right out on the street for a walk or do whatever they want to do.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, you asked, are we supportive? And I think I'll second Ben and the mayor. Like, I worked in that building for probably 7 years. And so would be thrilled to have literally anything else there, even if it is just the interior of it is something more attractive, something more useful than I think when I left that building, already there was nobody there. And so to take a structure that sits there vacant and turn it into housing, I think is great. And appreciative of the extra green space as well. So I'd second Ben on that. Like, to me, yeah, the nuances, maybe the details have changed, matter a lot to you, but less to me in terms of, I like the, for lack of a better word, texture, I guess, that it adds to the landscape to keep that there. I think it's interesting. I think it's useful. Yeah.
I'll go Mary, and I think I saw Ben's hand again. Yeah.
Yeah, I can also back up Brian on this. I worked out of that building as well. It is not aesthetically a pleasing building inside or out. So yes, I appreciate the creativity and the willingness to continue to try to work this site because I don't know of many other developers that might want to do that. So I appreciate that. And I'm, yeah, in support of kind of moving forward and seeing what we can do with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Ben, did you have another comment?
Yeah, you just jogged my memory a little bit when you mentioned the aesthetics and the outside. I think you probably know around here, I probably couldn't pay developers enough to give me like a concrete and masonry structure. I'm really hoping we're not going to slap plastic all over the outside of this if we can do it. That's just preference.
Yeah, I was thinking some balconies and cool screening, not slapping plastic all over it, but yeah. Wanda?
We talk about townhomes. Are we talking about leasing or buying?
For lease.
You're
The
leasing,
thing here is a for lease. project.
leasing. Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions, thoughts, concerns? Yeah, Debbie?
I'm the devil's advocate here. I'm sorry that my house is down the street from
I
there.
like it. Yeah.
And my neighbors are really concerned about 559 additional apartments right across from a park.
Yeah.
So are you as the developer willing to do a traffic study?
We would have to, I'm sure.
We
The
need to
garage
s-
has to be viable from that
We need to
standpoint.
speak internally, even if it doesn't come across now, about what it's going to do for transport costs, because it's going to be more wear and tear on the street. We're going to have to add police. You can't add that many more people demographically to a population and think that you don't need more police or public works. So some of those are internal. They have really nothing to do with you, but I need those kind of answers before I can comfortably move forward on any front. And I think we all should be asking, if we start needing additional police, what is the actual cost at the end of the day for the city? And I don't have those figures right now.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration. I will tell you that in my experience, when you look at a traffic study for a 160,000 foot office building, and you compare that to a traffic study for a multifamily property, 160,000 feet of office space should have about 4 people per 1,000 square feet. And so you're going to be at 640 people. And most of those people in an office building are going to come between 8 and 9. They're going to leave around 5. And so you end up actually with heavier loads on your peak traffic, with
In the rear end.
right. At the times that everybody's trying to get home or get to work, right? And so I'm not super concerned about the traffic. I understand the need for services. Obviously, people sleeping there overnight is different than people working there all day. But at the same time, I think those are things that can be solved for. I'm not super worried about the traffic part of it. I think you'll actually end up with a trickle of cars that come and go more regularly throughout the day, as opposed to these huge one-time events in the morning and the evening. And that'll probably actually be a traffic benefit relative to its intended use. I know it's not being used that way right now. Like the other thing we have to talk about is like, there's only 20,000 feet worth of people in there right now. And even those people might work from home or whatever the thing is. But when it was originally approved and when some of y'all worked in that building, I'm sure there were more folks there. So I think from that standpoint, at least compared to its original intention, we should be fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, just on that front in terms of kind of the economic fiscal impact, I'm sure we'll get to this on our next agenda item actually, but don't sell yourself short. We need daytime population in where these empty offices are, right?
Yeah.
That's it's hard to imagine a scenario where we don't generate so much more tax revenue with a building full of people than from an empty one that's depressed, right? So I'll bang that drum all day. Come in here and show me the ROI, and that'll help everybody on this dais, I think.
We don't do a very good job as developers of quantifying things that are outside the 4 walls of our property a lot of times. And if you think about 600 units and you have 1.3 to 1.5 people per unit, that means you're going to have 1,000 people living there. And, or close to 1,000 maybe. Those people go out to eat. They want to shop somewhere. Your Target's going to do better. Your restaurants up and down Johnson Drive are going to do better. Those are things that the consultants that you guys hire are much better at kind of knowing what the ratios would be. But there's certainly an impact there in terms of the spillover for what they're doing, because even the folks that were going to that office building every day, some of them were coming down Metcalf or up Metcalf, and then they're leaving and going and spending those dollars other places when they go back. So this is certainly going to have an impact that way.
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't mean to ask. I think we spoke about the sort of narrow sliver of land on the east side of the street being potentially dedicated to the city. Is that still the idea, or is that changing?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's definitely still there. To your point, historic versus non-historic, we want non-historic, probably still need to lean heavier on that TIF, right? Because there's not those tax credits there. And so if there's a TIF bargain, the TIF bargain would include dedicating that lot to the city.
Yeah, and that's why I said all other things being equal, I would prefer to improve the aesthetics of that building. But I think, if the numbers is a big difference, I think before what you were asking for in incentives was kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what council was willing to do. So I think keeping that in mind as you're running those different scenarios would be important.
Can we know where the edge of that envelope is?
I mean, I think before, if we're talking about economies
You
of
tell
scale.
me if you decide you're going to move forward and we'll get out the envelopes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, you're talking
think-
about the repurposing being more expensive, but you're talking about huge savings on parking, and then you're getting the economies of scale. So, I mean, I'm still of the view, I mean, well, obviously we haven't seen the numbers, but that the incentive package should be theoretically going down or getting more favorable to the city, if you're doubling the size of the project, but obviously we have to see what the actual costs look like associated with.
Laura, and her
Everything.
team do a great job
Yeah,
of
and-
making sure they hold us accountable.
And I did have a question. This might be more for Brian. Now that we're going to be talking about a 10-story building, have we looked at all on how that fits with our current zoning requirements, or if there are particular allowances for adaptive reuse as opposed to new construction? The answer might be you haven't dove into all that since this is new and breaking news, but I was just curious.
Currently, that's all part of the form-based code
Yeah.
district, so there are no
None.
limits in height.
Okay.
10-story building's fine. And I don't think they'll change much with
Okay.
new code updates.
Great. Any other comments, questions? No?
Thank you for your
All right. Thank you. All right. Are we ready to move into our second item? Yeah. All right. Our second item, are we moving to our second item, Laura, or was there more to conclude on this one? Okay, perfect. Our second item is review and discussion of tax increment financing and tax abatement basics with Laura, Kevin, and Bruce virtually.
This off, Kevin, and then I'll get right out of your way. So one of the things that we've done periodically is to kind of just take a step back when we're not knee deep in the actual specifics of any particular project and talk a little bit about how tax increment financing works, the mechanics of that, as well as tax abatement. And so that's what we intend to spend the rest of this work session accomplishing with you all. There's a lot of material included in your packets and the presentation material. We have this evening Kevin Wempe and Chanel Perez from Gilmore and Bell. They're the city's bond counsel who represent us on our incentive deals. Bruce Kimmel with Ellers Incorporated, our municipal financial advisor, is online and will do his presentation via Zoom. And then I'll just have kind of one last slide, but please feel free to stop along the way. There's no such thing as a dumb question or an inappropriate question. Well, I guess there could be inappropriate questions, but I got to remember my audience, right? But this is really designed to just allow you the time and the space to think about it. That is not to say that when we get into negotiating the next round of incentives, the next one that will be coming forward to you all is going to be the Encore project, Sunflowers Phase 2, revised Phase 2 project. But hopefully this will give you a little more than a month to kind of mull over some of these ideas, think about it, and really for some of you, this will be kind of your first foray start to finish for a project. And so others can tell you how fun that is. So anyway, I would like to introduce Kevin Wempe with Gilmore and Bell, who will start our presentations.
Right. Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again and get a chance to speak with some of you for the first time, I think. And like Laura said, I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Chanel Perez. And like Laura said, this is intended to be the really high level nuts and bolts procedural stuff related to tax increment financing or TIF and industrial revenue bonds or IRBs. So we'll get into how they work, how they apply, some of the projects that are eligible and so forth. And by all means, please interject along the way if something comes to mind. I think prepared remarks will be under 10 minutes here, so it should move fairly quickly. So feel free to fire away. To hit the high levels here, we'll start with TIF and have a handful of slides there, and then wrap up with IRB, and then kind of compare and contrast the two towards the end. To start out with TIF, it's a broadly applicable tool for all sorts of projects, and industrial, commercial, mixed use, residential. Obviously, the project we just discussed was one that TIF was approved for the first phase. So see it plenty for residential and multifamily type projects of that nature. The basic underlying principle of TIF is that it takes the incremental property taxes along with some other revenues at the city's option, but incremental property tax revenues generated by the project diverts those and can repay eligible project costs. TIF for each project plan is limited to 20 years. So there's a 20-year period where those revenues can be captured and be recycled to pay either bonds issued to pay TIF costs or reimburse on a pay-as-you-go basis eligible project costs. And what all pay-as-you-go means is that typically the developer fronts those project costs, and then as those TIF revenues are collected with the city, they'll have rights to access those TIF revenues over that 20-year period to reimburse itself for those costs. And Justin, am I driving, or do you have? Next, thank you. Okay, thank you. Couple key things on TIF to start out with is that you need an eligible area. So you can't just use TIF anywhere throughout the city. And these are the three main eligibility criteria that are used to establish a TIF district. Conservation area at a high level relates to having buildings that are 35 years in age or older, and several factual factors that indicate obsolescence or dilapidation. And then blight is the second one. There's 9 factors under the statute that indicate blight. And so if a developer comes forward and says, offers that the property is blighted, it's usually accompanied by a blight study that proves out that, yes, a majority of these factors exist, and therefore under the statute, you can consider establishing a TIF district. So those first two are based on factual findings made by the governing body. The third one is a pre-1992 enterprise zone, which is just those zones were created at that time. And if the project exists within one of those, you're per se eligible to use TIF within the enterprise zone. Going to eligible project costs, pretty narrow world in TIF of what you can finance using TIF dollars. Think land acquisition, site prep, site demo, and horizontal.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
The pre-1992 enterprise zone, I guess, how does that relate to, do we have those in Mission? Or is that just like nationwide?
Yeah.
We have, so that's not the criteria by which we could establish a TIF district.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And I just have a follow-up to this area while we're on it. So most Mission would be eligible for this because of your conservation definition.
It'd be a factual finding based on how you drew the district, but certainly if you have old buildings, you can often find that the other factors exist. So factual finding though. So to wrap up eligible costs, yeah, again, acquisition costs, horizontal infrastructure and so forth, generally confined to just the district and the contiguous areas. So those revenues are redirected within the project area. And then vertical costs typically ineligible under the statute with the exception of parking. So again, rewinding 10 or 15 minutes, parking, a very expensive cost of residential and office projects and the like to build the structured parking. So often we see TIF paired with those projects because you can access the dollars to build the parking structure.
At one point, when we were working on the gateway, it seems like something came up on the TIF criteria that it had to be unique in nature, that there was something about it that was not aware of everywhere else. I mean, it was a standalone, something unique. Do you remember that? Or is it just
Star bonds, Laura?
I think it's a couple of things. So in terms of what Kevin's talking about right now, we're just talking about what would allow us to establish the underlying district. So once you get into your TIF project plan, that's when you get into the specifics of whatever project the developer might be proposing. And so I think it's more related to what the city council is looking for in terms of how that project might align with TIF project plans always have to be found in conformance with our comprehensive plan by the Planning Commission. So that's one piece of it. But I think it's more along the lines of, if we're going to use public dollars to incentivize, what are we buying our dollars with? And is that something, is that a need that we have? So is that a destination of some sort? Is that something that's unique that maybe doesn't exist in our community or in the surrounding area? Is that, housing, because we have a countywide, metro-wide housing shortage, all of those kinds of things. So it's not specific in terms of what goes into a TIF project in it having to be unique. It's really more, I would say, and unless you disagree, aligns with what the council's vision for how they want to use public incentives.
And Mayor, that's where my mind went to, Mayor, is it started the star bond criteria and underlying reasoning for star bonds from a statutory and policy basis. A lot of times is a unique attraction or visitation type thing. So I know that's been kicked around at times at the Gateway site. So maybe that had something to do with that thought. Okay, to cover a few of the key terms. First one is the base or base year assessed valuation. Very mathematical under the statute is that on the day a district is established, on that date, the assessed valuation is frozen for all project areas within the district. And that is the benchmark against which future assessed valuation growth is measured to determine what the increment is generated. So we've got a visual on the next slide that'll help with this, but think, on the date it's established, that base year is set and everything below it, taxing jurisdictions are held harmless. All those revenues continue flowing to taxing jurisdictions, and above it, most of the mills are eligible for capture.
Kevin, if you extend a district, how does that work? Does the whole thing become new, or is part the older date and part the new date? Or how does that work?
Yeah, the statute is not, I think it's not explicit about that. And the determination is that it goes to the date of the district establishment. So if in year 0, you create one TIF district, 2 years later, you expand it next door, hypothetically, 2 years later, I think the base for the expanded area looks back to the original creation date.
Okay, interesting.
That's the way we treated it with the block TIF on their phase 1 project. So that TIF district was established in 2017. So that's the base year that was established in relationship to that project. It remains 2017, correct.
Yep. Tax increment we've already covered, but again, think that's growth above the base throughout the district. And even though you can have multiple project areas within a district, the county would tell you, and the statute directs, that TIF is a district-wide evaluation. So even though you might have project areas 1 through 4, TIF increment and growth throughout the district is what determines the increment.
Could you explain why that 1.5 mils is no longer applicable?
Because 1 year ago, the legislature removed the 1.5 mils for the state building levy, I think is the nature of that. I think that's effective this summer, if I remember right, that 1.5 mils from your property tax bill is going to disappear because the state eliminated that. That highlights, council member, that the 28 mils that are shielded are for the school district. That's 20 mils of the statewide base levy that all school districts are subject to. And each school district has the option to levy up to 8 mils of capital outlay. All those dollars stay local. It's now been almost 10 years ago that was a change in the law, but still somewhat new to TIF anyway, that those 8 mils are shielded for TIF districts created after that date. TIF fund, that is just the place the dollars go when the county determines the increment. It goes into the TIF fund held with the city. And only upon adoption of a TIF project plan can you utilize those funds to, again, either pay eligible project costs or second repay bonds. Okay, this is the visual just depicting base year assessed value versus, the right column is all of the tax revenue after the project's complete, fully valued on the tax rolls. That blue box at the bottom is the base, again, remains constant. All those dollars go to the taxing jurisdictions. The yellow box are those excluded mill levies. So now the 28 mills for the school district that are off limits for TIF. that would flow through dollar for dollar to the school district. And then the green box above is that increment that's available for capture to repay eligible project costs.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So that increment, if once the district is set, but before any development has occurred, it just gets thrown into like a piggy bank, basically.
Right.
That it's set aside to be used at a future date.
You are one slide ahead of me.
Oh.
But yeah, no, well done. So if you can flip to the next one. Very, very high level, but the step one of establishing the district, again, we're setting that base year. You can see in the second bullet point, establishing the geographic area. And under state law, that's when collection of increment begins. And so relating to the TIF district, we mentioned with the project from the first item, that district was created in 2017. And so technically a TIF fund was set up at that time, and any increase in the assessed valuation since then has flowed into the city's TIF fund. Now, nothing's changed on the site, so that amount's probably pretty minimal. Just usual.
$50,000.
Right, right. Right.
And then the thought is once you develop it, that number explodes.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, oftentimes what happens because these areas are older or, I use the term blight carefully because it's a separate category, but vacant, they've been vacant for a number of years. We're seeing assessed valuation go down, right? Over time. So there really isn't that increment that gets generated.
Or if the building's demolished.
Or the buildings is demolished and then there's.
I know. Yeah, and then Kevin, when you said available, I just wanted to highlight, since we do have new people and then for the public, that property tax increment doesn't automatically go to the eligible costs. It can be divvied up, right?
Right, Mayor. So some of your development agreements and most of your recent ones have a split between the city and the developer where you can agree by contract that a certain percentage of the costs get diverted to the developer's use, and then a certain are set aside for the city's use. With the overhanging issue that it all has to be TIF eligible costs in order to extract it from the TIF fund.
Yeah, and so rather than just tax dollars that could be used for anything, there are some restrictions on what the city can use that portion for, right? Yeah.
Right. It all has to fit under the statute. So you can't just take your portion and stick it in the general fund. You got to extract it for an eligible cost. Back to the slide. Step 2 is adoption of a TIF project plan. It's like I mentioned earlier, you can have multiple project areas within each TIF district and activate them on separate timelines. And the underlying reasoning is that you get a separate 20-year clock for each TIF plan, where you can collect that increment and send it back to the developer or use it to pay bonds or repay the city in some cases to pay those eligible costs. So you can see a multi-phase development where this might be useful. You create a large district and phase 1 begins in year 3 and phase 2 begins in year 5. You'd want to align the 20-year clocks to use those funds as efficiently as possible. So there is that adaptability in the statute. With the reminder that, again, you can't spend funds for a TIF plan until it's active. So that 20-year clock governs spending the funds as well. Next slide, please. This next 2 slides really just extrapolate on the step 1, step 2 we just covered. I won't read the slide back to you, but you can bet that the procedure involved in TIF is as intense as it comes. Only Star Bonds exceeds this as far as notices and resolutions and public hearings and so forth. Start to finish, if we had just a new TIF project walk through the door today, it's usually 4 to 6 months to get from today through all the procedural hoops to adoption of a TIF project plan. If we hit all the waypoints along the way and the developer does as well. So that the high level process is just a resolution calling a public hearing on establishing the district. Mailed notice goes to the school district, county, and property owners. There's published notice. You come back and hold a public hearing and consider an ordinance to establish that geographic area, the TIF district. Importantly, the county and school district also have a protest, so they can unilaterally, within 30 days of that public hearing, terminate or kill the project. So they have that right under statute for TIF projects. And on the next slide, step 2 relates to the TIF project plan, which, as Laura mentioned, the first stop for a TIF project plan is to go to the Planning Commission to make a finding that the plan is in conformance with your comp plan for development. And then really step 2 mirrors step 1 of, again, a resolution, published notice, mailed notice, and a public hearing on the TIF plan. The main thing to highlight here is that under statute, a TIF plan for adoption requires a supermajority, 2/3 vote of the governing body. That's our last slide on TIF, and I'll switch to IRBs unless anybody else wants to carry on.
Do you want to tackle any additional TIF questions? Yeah, Cheryl, then Ben.
One of the questions I had in reading through, the policy that we have, this might be a question for you, Laura. When we talk about the amount of tax increment financing available, that the capital investment from the person that's applying only has to be 5 million? Now, is that consistent with other cities, or is that set by the state, or?
It's at the discretion of the council. I think we wanted to make that threshold high enough that we weren't using TIF for really small projects. There are some other tools potentially and other things. But we could increase that. What we've seen is every project where we've applied TIF has been far in excess of that threshold.
Right.
But that's something that the council that was the threshold that was established back when the policy was originally adopted.
In 2007. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's quite a bit of time ago. That was my only question. Thank you.
Yep, Ben.
Yeah, fill in the details here and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from time to time we've discussed, and just for the benefit of some newer folks, that sometimes there are TIF funds kind of sitting around, but plan didn't materialize or whatever. I think I recall that in some cases we can develop and do things within that district that as long as they're eligible as a city, right? And it's sort of become the developer ourselves. So just in general, TIF is kind of, it's really available to as more than just a tax incentive if we ever needed to use it that way, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's nothing in the statute that prohibits use by the city or other parties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've.
And we'll touch on that. I've got a list when we get to, I didn't want you to read ahead, but I've got kind of a summary of where we've used TIF and tax abatement. And one of those, it's related to the Millhouse project, but you may recall that we created a TIF project plan to access dollars in that TIF district to help with infrastructure relocation costs associated with that project. So yes, we do have that opportunity.
All right. Anything on this side? Questions on TIF? Nope. All right. IRBs.
Okay.
One, you have a question? Sorry.
I'm sorry. So TIF and tax abatement are two different things. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I've got it then.
All right. Okay, on to IRBs then. This will just be a couple of slides on IRBs, and then we'll compare the tools used in some tables. IRBs are usually an incentive granting vehicle. So bonds is a little bit of a misnomer in most people's minds that we're issuing bonds that provide construction proceeds or provide actual financing to the developer. When I say incentive granting vehicle, there are two incentives available using IRBs. And number one is sales tax exemption on construction materials and furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And second is property tax abatement for a term of up to 10 years. That tax abatement, there are 8 mills shielded by state statute, again, since 2017. So the same 8 mills we talked about for capital outlay under TIF are shielded. All other mills are subject to abatement under the IRB statute. And as council member just pointed out, tax abatement here means those taxes are just never imposed. So if it's a 75% abatement, for instance, over that 10-year abatement term, the developer pays 25% of the hypothetical tax bill. Now compared to TIF, where taxes are paid in full, collected by the county, the increment is then sent over to the city and sent to the TIF fund. So during a TIF period, the taxes are paid in full and then recycled through the TIF fund. IRB tax abatement, they're just never paid. One thing to point out on the sales tax exemption, for FF&E, that's pretty straightforward. Under separate statute, under state law, labor for new construction projects is already exempt from sales taxes, so IRBs aren't necessarily needed for those costs. But for some reason, renovation projects do not have the same benefit, and so IRBs for a renovation project can exempt labor costs. So it's sort of an added boost to renovation projects to apply IRBs and exempt labor costs.
What
Sales tax.
FFEs? Yeah, thank you. Oh.
Yeah.
Furniture, fixtures and equipment.
Sorry, I felt I tried to say that in full a couple of times and then I went back to
A little bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the labor on renovations, since there isn't sales tax on services, what is the sales tax related to the labor side? I guess.
Yeah, so sales tax is imposed on labor for a renovation project, but for a
Nope.
new project,
It doesn't
it's
exist.
waived under separate law.
Okay.
So
We're-
IRBs can step in and fill that gap.
Okay. So theoretically, if you were repurposing a building, that would potentially apply.
Now for sales tax exemption, and this is evident to you all, but that is mostly the state's dollars. You know, they levy a 6.5% sales tax and cities and counties are much lower than that. So it's a little bit of an oddity that you're able to unilaterally grant an incentive that is mostly the state's dollars. And so for that reason and others, I think it's one that developers often treat as sort of the lowest criteria or lowest threshold, lowest barrier to entry on incentives, because it is in fact mostly the state's dollars you're working with. Okay, last slide on IRBs. This is the very easily digestible,
Yeah.
straightforward one we can skip over. This diagram has confused more people than I'd care to admit. But I think the key takeaway here is
Everyone knows what indenture is, right?
yeah, right. Only bond attorneys should have to know what some of these words mean. So this is to reinforce that, again, we're not issuing bonds that are construction financing for the developer. Unlike how you borrow money as a city to go repave a street or something, you know, a bank loans you the money or an underwriter basically loans you the money and you go use those funds to complete the project. 99.8% of these projects using IRBs are, again, just an incentive vehicle. So the developer goes and traditionally finances its project using private debt and equity. And then it buys its own bond in order to satisfy the statute to have its project cost be financed or reimbursed with bond proceeds. And so we always call them buy your own bond deals. And the point of this graphic is to show that the developer is still seeking traditional financing to pay its project costs. And the developer is also the bondholder, which means it's paying itself its own debt service on the bond while the bond is outstanding. So again, it is not a vessel for construction financing in most cases. It is just for those to access those incentives. Maybe the most important things about IRBs to reinforce, you're not extending your credit. So the city does not back repayment of the bonds and the statute prohibits that. It has no effect on your credit rating for that reason.
And Kevin, it's probably more simple on the sales tax exemption side, but is it fair to say that all of these arrows on this chart basically means that the developer gets to stand in the place of the city because the city would get a sales tax exemption if they were doing the project? I thought we've talked about it similarly to that way before.
Right. So the reason the sales tax exemption applies is because the project's financed or reimbursed with bond proceeds. And so, yeah, this shows the city acting as a conduit. There's a lease back of the property between the city and the developer. And so from the city's perspective, in the middle of that diagram, it's just showing you as the conduit passing along those lease payments and the bond proceeds to the developer so they can access the incentives.
Might be the primary reason I would never be a bond attorney. I don't understand it thoroughly still. So it's a very confusing process and a difficult one to explain, but.
This chart isn't clear?
I've seen it.
Okay, last couple slides here. A few tables here just to refresh, go over what we've done here and compare the two tools. So with TIF and IRB columns. Under separate statutory schemes, and like we said earlier, TIF is a diversion of taxes that are paid into that TIF fund. And on the right side, IRB with property taxes is just total abatement of those costs. So for the property tax abatement, the 10-year term, that's operational savings for the developer over that term. It lowers their burden of property taxes. And with the sales tax exemption, it is straight upfront savings to the project that they just never incur that sales tax as they buy their materials for the project. As far as project eligibility, I know we spent a lot of time on TIF talking about eligible areas and eligible costs that are very narrow. IRBs are broadly applicable, all sorts of projects, commercial, residential, industrial, warehouse, that type of thing. The one thing to highlight for IRBs is that it is not available for owner occupied housing. So for the residential apartment complexes that are for rent, definitely available for those. But if it's, single family subdivision or something like that, we can't use IRBs. Okay, term of TIF for each project area, you get up to 20 years. IRB, you get 10 years of tax abatement. We've talked plenty about cash flow impacts. I guess we just covered how that affects the developer's budget. And then the shielded mills again, 28 for TIF and then just 8 for IRB. So different mills shielded and different time periods of the 10 and 20 years. And then the last slide is proceed. Oh, yeah.
You cost bonds for page ago and then general, since we've got some abbreviations on this page, general obligation.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the diversion of those TIF revenues can be applied to repay bonds issued to fund TIF project costs, or be used on a pay-go or pay-as-you-go basis. And pay-go just means the developer's fronting all the costs and then collecting on the back end for that up to 20 years, the TIF revenues to reimburse eligible costs. As the mayor pointed out earlier, the developer's rights to that might be limited by the redevelopment agreement. They might only have rights to a portion of the TIF revenues. And we always insist on a cap of TIF reimbursement so that we're not over incentivizing a certain development.
Yeah,
Let me
Debbie?
ask you a quick question, and maybe
Mhm.
it's my ignorance, but if you do a deferral of tax on a property, how does the county weigh into this? Since the county gets money off property tax, how can we defer their part? Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. And I don't think I covered that, so I'm glad you asked the question. I think earlier I used a hypothetical 75% abatement, meaning of the eligible mills, 25% of the tax bill is paid each, goes out on the normal tax bill in November. That 25% or whatever portion is actually paid as a payment in lieu of tax gets distributed pro rata to all taxing jurisdictions in accordance with mill levy. So it doesn't all come to the city, doesn't all go to the county. You can't pick and choose and say, the school district gets all of that payment and so forth. By statute, those pilots or payments in lieu of tax get spread out in accordance with mill levy. And to compare it to TIF, I mentioned the school districts and county have a veto right to unilaterally interfere with your project. With IRBs, they get notice of a public hearing, but there's no right for other taxing jurisdictions to interfere with the project. You can unilaterally grant a tax abatement. It's a payment in lieu of tax. Yeah, and this is getting into legal minutia a little bit, but when property is exempted or abated under IRBs, it's binary from the county standpoint. A property is either on the tax rolls or off. IRBs take it off the tax roll. And so a payment in lieu of tax, to get to that world where we're doing a 25% tax abatement, it's actually 100% abatement, and there's a pilot or payment in lieu of tax put in by contract to get to that 25% payment. That's just legal and statutory that it's either on the tax rolls or it's off. It's quicker just to say it's a 75% tax abatement than go through all that, but good question.
And then Kevin, can you real quick touch on general obligation versus special obligation?
Yeah, you bet. And before jumping into that, to cap off bonds versus pay as you go, for the most part, the city on TIF projects and most other cities, especially for the last decade, 15 years, have mostly done pay as you go incentive projects. And the main reason for that is that you hold the best recourse as a city is that you can turn off reimbursement of TIF reimbursement if the developer gets outside of the bounds of their redevelopment contract. With a bonded project, all those 20 years of revenue get securitized into an upfront bond issue, and those dollars go out the door very early on in the process, which eliminates your recourse. There are certainly projects where bonds make sense and a bond issue gets a project over the hump, but that is the main push and pull of, do we issue bonds or is pay as you go? When you issue bonds, the statute does permit you to issue general obligation bonds, which means the city's full faith and credit would back repayment of those bonds. That's even rarer than the TIF bond issue I just mentioned that is pretty rare already. But the statute does permit you to stand behind and guarantee a bond using your full faith and credit. The effect of that versus a special obligation bond is that it lowers the borrowing cost because a special obligation bond is secured only by the TIF revenues. So the bondholder that purchased it is subject to the success of the project and that property tax revenues materialize at this site. And they take on full risk of repayment based on that 20 years of project performance. So again, the main reason you'd pledge your GO credit is that the cost of that bond, the interest cost would decrease because you're lending your highly rated credit to the project, lowers that interest cost and would free up more proceeds to fund the project. I think the last slide is just procedure, which we spent some time on in TIF, much more streamlined for IRBs. That involves a public hearing, notice to the other taxing jurisdictions that public hearing is occurring. And then you can approve a resolution of intent, which approves the project on the front end, allows the developer to access the sales tax exemption certificate with the State Department of Revenue, and then go construct its project. And then typically at or near substantial completion of construction, the developer would return to the council to actually issue the bonds to finalize its incentive. And the main reason there's a lag there with construction occurring in between is that under state law, the property tax abatement commences the calendar year after bonds are issued. So big difference whether you issue the bonds on December 31st or January 1st to the developer. That one day is very meaningful for some reason under the statute, but that's what drives timing here.
Questions on that piece? Yep, Cheryl?
I noticed in the IRB, in the policy, it talked about, if the developer, for whatever reason, they order, let's just say they order structures and fixtures and all furniture, all that, and then they use it on another project unrelated, who monitors that? Because it's a misdemeanor if they use that. I mean, is that the city's responsibility or is it?
If they'd use the sales tax exemption certificate elsewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be subject to criminal penalties and falsification.
It is, but is it the city's responsibility to monitor that? Or who's doing it?
Department of Revenue would have ultimate.
Okay.
Just like any other sales tax incentive or sales tax reporting, it'd be the Department of Revenue.
Thank you.
Josepha?
It's okay. It's all right. Are these two, are TIF and IRB mutually exclusive or are they ever used together?
Good question. Often used together, except if you're using TIF, you cannot use IRBs for property tax abatement. It's prohibited under the statutes, but it's also probably evident that practically if you're diverting property tax revenues, you can't also abate the same. Makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, very, very common to use TIF and IRBs for the sales tax exemption, just like the project that preceded this one.
Yeah, Debbie?
Do any of if we have several projects pending and they're tax deferrals or tax abatements, is our credit rating at risk or is our credit rating even considered on all the monies we have going here and there?
I'm glad Bruce is on the line. That'd be a great Bruce question. I'll say for IRBs, I'm comfortable telling you that the IRBs you issue don't affect your credit rating just because you're not pledging any credit. You're just a conduit issuer for the incentive purposes. As to how a credit agency might look at TIF projects, that's probably a good Bruce question. I haven't heard it come up on rating conferences of credit rating agencies looking at that. My guess is the underlying reasoning is that you're deferring new property tax revenues that in concept don't affect what you're currently doing.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Kevin? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Is Bruce up next? Yeah, okay. Hi, Bruce.
Hello, Mayor. Hi, Council. It's good to be back with you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Well, first I'll start by chiming in on the last question that was answered. I have I guess, gosh, coming up on 26, 27 years of doing this kind of work, only had one client in which a credit rating analyst asked about the amount of tax base that was captured in TIF districts. And it was really kind of an extraordinary situation. It usually doesn't rise to the level of concern as long as the city is really doing a solid job, as the city of Mission is with all of its other areas of financial management. and, that you have a, a process for considering these incentives, and you do. So I would not have any qualms about the city entertaining new TIF requests and having it reflect badly on the city from a credit rating perspective.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Laura, I think, did you have yes, perfect. All right. Well, now that Kevin got to do the fun part of describing TIF and tax abatement and IRBs to you, I get to back up to the 35,000-foot level and talk more about strategic considerations. And I don't think I've met all of you there at the dais. I am Bruce Kimmel. I've had the privilege of working with the city at two different municipal advisory firms over most of the last 25 years, if not longer. And it's really been a pleasure to help you on bond issues as well as on economic development projects, doing financial analysis, helping to negotiate solutions, and working through all sorts of other considerations as it relates to development, both on the economic development and the housing development sides of things. So these slides are actually, Laura has an amazing filing system of some sort in which she found a previous iteration of this slide deck from about 10 years ago. And I still kind of like the flow of topics. So I updated a few things to reflect a few new considerations for the city, but the overall framework is more or less the same. And in working with cities and counties and development authorities in the Midwest, it's not uncommon for governing body members in particular to feel a little bit overwhelmed by all the factors and considerations. You've got what the developer is proposing to build and the cost estimates of that project, both the hard costs and then the soft costs involved in bringing a project to fruition. There might be related public infrastructure requirements and a question of, well, does the city build those infrastructure improvements or does the developer do that? And how does that get factored into the public participation? Just in the last discussion on the Foxridge project, there was a question about would there be an impact on public services? That comes up quite often. Of course, you have to gauge the developer's financial and practical capacity. That has been a recurring issue on another development project in the city that we're all well aware of. And it can be hard to nail that down sometimes as best as we might try, but that's a definite factor. And then you've got to look at, okay, well, if we do this public participation, what are the future revenues that we stand to gain? And also, what advancement of our policy objectives might we stand to achieve? And as you know, in the city of Mission, you've taken a strong stand on environmental practices, green building codes, also attainable housing, and some other things as well. And certainly those are policy objectives that have been advanced in the last several development projects. And then really the sort of bottom line question for me is, well, how do you balance risk and reward? Both the developers' risk and reward, what you're wanting them to take on, and also the city's risk and reward. And it can all just be very confusing and intertwined. So if we can go on to the next slide. And then sometimes to make matters worse, developers can arrive with their plan and a specific incentive proposal, often TIF, saying, well, this is what we want, this is what we need, and, consider this. And if you don't have a framework for unpacking that and really thinking about whether and how you want to participate, you really can feel like your back is against the wall. You might end up saying no, but feel like you've missed the opportunity, especially if it goes to a community nearby, or say yes, because you feel pressure, but, have you given away the store? And that's not a great position for you as elected officials to be in. And really, I do want to note that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Mission has its own unique priorities, its own growth pattern, life cycle, public finance and infrastructure characteristics, and an appetite to participate. And, you always have the right to say no thanks. We would welcome you to develop in our community, but we're not looking to participate in any financial way. And that's always the council's prerogative, right? But if you are looking to entertain proposals for public participation, well then how might you sort of lay out your considerations so that you get to an answer that you really feel good with about? And that's where I sort of talk about moving from strategic to tactical questions and considerations. All right, so the first one, and I think the city has more or less answered this in the past and continues to answer it in the affirmative. But the foundational question is economic development a priority? And by economic development, I mean all sorts of private development. So business development as well as housing development and diversification in the community. Are there certain types of development that are higher priorities? And are there certain areas of the city in which you really feel like, okay, we're more inclined to make this deal work and to find creative solutions for certain types of projects and in certain areas of the city? With Mission being relatively compact, it's not like you've got, green fields out to the west where you might say, gee, we really don't feel like we need to provide incentives versus, a downtown core. Everything in the city is more or less pretty well developed, and there are certainly various areas of the city that present redevelopment opportunities. But that might trigger some thoughts and some dialogue about the city's development opportunities and priorities. And then we really try to look at what are some of the costs, benefits and costs that the proposed project would bring. And those benefits can be both, quantitative as well as qualitative. Things like, again, green building achievements, attainable housing, et cetera. And some of the costs can also be qualitative around quality of life and other factors like that. Let's go on to the next slide. So then the last question that we really try to answer to the best of our ability and to work with the city in answering is, does the developer have the resources and the commitments from other resources to complete the project, and will they be a capable development partner? And by developer, I mean the lead person that stands in front of you at the podium, but also other partners on their team, whether it be equity partners, co-developers, financing institutions, and other consultants and partners in that way. So once you've looked at those questions, those 5 questions, sort of the go, no-go question, as I like to put it, is, so is the city willing, based on what you know at that point, to assist the project with financial participation, knowing that the exact tools and amounts are to be determined? Do you feel like you've got a good feeling about what's being proposed, who's proposing it, and the other assorted considerations to say, yeah, we're willing to take a hard look at this and figure out how we might be able to partner with you? And so then the next question after that is to really look at the gap. And I only really try to look at the gap, so to speak, once you've answered that first foundational question does it make sense to participate? So if that answer is yes, and then, is there a gap? Then we try to look at, why does it exist? We can go on to the next slide. So, gaps can exist. Sorry, I guess I jumped ahead a little bit, but I didn't have anything more on that slide. Gaps can exist for all sorts of reasons. And the Foxridge discussion noted, a few of those, at least what the developer will be putting forward as gaps regarding construction costs relative to what they'll be able to achieve in future rents for those apartments. There might be other site remediation costs involved. All sorts of things can drive the gap and create a need for public participation. And part of our job at Ellers is really to sort of poke at the numbers and make sure that they all hang together and also are based on reasonable assumptions and see, okay, is that gap basically there? Do we think it actually has a potential to get worse? Do we think it actually has a potential to get better, i.e. smaller, with or without public participation? And we use that kind of sensitivity analysis to inform our understanding of that gap and how the city might want to proceed. So then at that point is really when we think about TIF or abatement or city investment in infrastructure or any number of other things. Sales tax exemption would be another one. All the things that Kevin discussed previously. And what are the pros and cons of the tools? And how can we use them to fill the gap, but also to work best to the city's advantage? And so, the point Kevin made about sales tax exemption is right on point. That's a relatively low cost tool for the city. Granted, it means funds, that the state isn't getting, but sort of in terms of building the layer cake of tools to reach a solution, that sales tax exemption is usually right there on the first level because it's really a pretty easy thing for the city to give. Again, assuming you want to participate and assuming you believe there is a reasonable gap to be filled. And then from there, right, we look at other things, other ways of filling the gap in addition and getting to a win-win for the city and for the developer. So really, what does that mean for the developer to have a win? Well, it's not to get every possible thing it can from the city, but it's to get them to a point where they and their partners have the confidence to commit their resources, right? That equity, millions of dollars of equity, and to put security and other obligations on loan agreements as well, that they've got the ability to make a reasonable profit on the project. Yes, there are things that could get more expensive. That's part of the risk of being a developer. But there's also the opportunity if their analysis of the area and the opportunity on the site is correct, they could actually outperform their operating pro forma projections as well, and achieve a little bit better profit. So the task is to not just say no, it's to really get to a place that gives them running room, a runway, if you will, to succeed and at a reasonable rate of return. And then for you, of course, it's to advance your development and policy priorities and really to do that with the best possible risk and reward balance for the project and for the city overall. And so, Laura, I know has a table of past development agreements and incentives that were part of that, and each one of those was really looked at on its own merits. What was the proposed development? Where was it proposed to occur? And what were the both tangible number of units being developed or the taxes that would be generated, but also how was it going to advance the city's policy priorities? So I will stop there and ask if you have any questions.
Questions for Bruce? Yeah, Ben?
I suppose, I don't know if this is specifically for Bruce or for staff or all of the above. I've thought a lot about some things I'd like to see us kind of learn from certain failed projects and just carry over from our past discussions about tax abatement policy. For starters, I think I said this before. I'm sorry if I'm repeating territory I've covered, but on the tax abatement project that we have looked at and approved in the recent past, we had to commission this ROI analysis for the tax dollars. Basically, I remember it being a table of all the taxing jurisdictions, how many dollars they would forego in the deal, and then what the estimated economic impact would be in terms of new tax revenue. And on the project I'm thinking of, all of the taxing jurisdictions, stood to gain more than they gave up in tax abatement, which is, for me, one of the criteria that I would want in an incentive deal of any kind. I'd love to see us adopt policy around that for TIF projects, and just be able to see that very, very clearly every time we talk about one of these deals. And also maybe to cover the cost side of things, as Debbie likes to remind us, we have to quantify those things. But that was a great vehicle on that tax abatement project to just see who's losing dollars and where are they getting them back. And, equally just kind of one-stop shopping, especially for council, but for the public as well, to see what's the estimated impact of services. And I think we have to be clear, those are estimates, but the question is that's viable for tax abatement. Is that viable for TIF and other incentive vehicles? And is that a reasonable thing to ask for?
And so what you're referencing is called a cost benefit analysis that is statutorily required with the IRBs or the tax abatements. And interestingly enough, the mayor asked me exactly that question.
Awesome.
And asked me if I would ask Mr. Kimmel and Mr. Wimpy if that was a similar tool. And so when we look at the TIF projects, historically, what we've done is we've sort of done that more narrowly focused analysis on just the benefits to us as the city of Mission. And I think, as I've talked to the mayor and others, that broader look at how the decisions that we might be making are impacting our surrounding neighbors and other taxing jurisdictions. So I don't know the answer, and maybe either one of these folks who are much more versed in that can speak to that, or we can think about how we can incorporate some of those things in our conversations going forward related to TIF as well.
Yeah, because I think to me it helps inform, what is maybe the level of city participation we would want to give. If we've sort of already answered, like Bruce said, the sort of foundational question of is this a project we want to support, then I think, yeah, especially I like that cost benefit analysis too, because it does include more of the cost side as well in terms of the services, for us, for the school district, et cetera. And yeah, seeing will everyone really come out ahead as opposed to just answering the question of, is this a project that needs incentives? So yeah, that was kind of my question for Bruce or Kevin. Is there any reason why we couldn't also, have the other consultant who did that cost benefit analysis, or have, I don't know if that's something Bruce's team can also do, run that same analysis sort of alongside our normal analysis on TIF projects?
I would love to take a crack at that. Oh, Kevin, unless you wanted to.
Why don't you go first?
So a few thoughts for you, Mayor, and for Ben. First of all, we really try to answer with as much clarity and certainty as we can the so-called but-for question. And that's sort of a old term, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the idea is, but for the proposed incentives, would the project occur as proposed? Not would any project occur. Somebody could put up a quick trip, right? But would the proposed project with the benefits and the policy advancements and everything else occur without the proposed incentive package? And I think that does have some merit, as a fundamental element in your considerations. As it relates to the cost benefit analysis that's statutorily required, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hot take here. I am not a big fan of that document. I think the economic analysis, and this isn't a knock on the consultant who does it or any of the consultants who do those projects and those analyses, but I just don't see that being good economics, good math, really anything to hang your hat on. I do think that we could do more along those lines in a way that makes sense for Mission with TIF. That's not at all something that I would say, oh, you shouldn't bother doing. I think we could absolutely look at that, knowing that there are estimates, knowing that nobody has a perfect crystal ball. I think we would just want to put reasonable expectations around the usefulness of that and how it factors into your negotiations and considerations. But I guess I would propose almost a better and more relevant cost benefit analysis for the city than what is statutorily required as part of the tax abatement process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I certainly appreciate your expertise on that, and I don't by any means think we should stop at what the statute requires, especially if you don't think that it's terribly concrete or have reservations about it. I do think just in general, right, across any incentive vehicle, which for us, it's all just implementation details. It's, the deal is what matters and the impact to the community. It's fair for us to be able to see what we are asking or more likely telling other taxing jurisdictions to put on the table, and to try and quantify to some degree if we expect those taxing jurisdictions to see any kind of return on that investment. Even if it's just kind of like, no, they're hosed, or yes, they're going to get some economic lift out of this.
Yeah, I think it helps with the, if it proves out, it helps with the positive storytelling, right? Because it's helpful to say what are the gains. I mean, I think maybe it was Kevin said originally with it, or no, it was the developer was saying that originally that they're maybe not so great at telling us what are the benefits of, say, having 600 new residents in your community. What is that going to mean for support of downtown businesses? What is that going to mean for, the use of your parks and, sort of livelihood of the streets and all of those sorts of things? They're really internally focused. So how do we get at that piece? And then similarly, yeah, that we require them to do things like a traffic study, but they're not going to sort of come forward and say, here's our full impact on city services either, right? So how do we get at that? And maybe it's not, the statutory framework for a cost benefit analysis, but, I think of the meme that's like the why not both, and why can't we have the but for analysis and the cost benefit analysis when we're doing the TIF projects? Because I think it would be a useful tool for better explaining the why to our residents as well.
Yeah. I'll try to extrapolate a little bit and stick to the legal sides. And if I veer into Bruce's lane, he seems like the Wizard of Oz, coming in virtually or get into policy and stuff. I'll try to stay clear of that, but I do have some thoughts that might help frame how you look at those. And first of all, on the TIF side, yes, an IRB statute requires the cost benefit analysis. The statute very helpfully provides like half a sentence on what it should contain. It says a cost benefit analysis that evaluates state revenues or something like that. And so the one you get is much more robust than that, takes into account local jurisdictions. That's typical. Under the TIF Act, it requires a feasibility study to tag along with each project plan, which is helpful. They come in all shapes and sizes too, because the statute, again, isn't super descriptive on what that should entail. But like Bruce said, some of them come to a point of a but-for analysis where there's, the cap table and then IRR are evaluated and sort of screened by the city's advisor. So that there is something like that required by the TIF Act. To get into some of the framing and hopefully not the policy aspect, is there are shortcomings to all of those, right? When you look at those, while the preparers of those analyses try to capture every fluffy fresh donut that's bought by someone working on the site, or pick your retailer and type of spin-off development, that stuff's hard to quantify. So it is just a snapshot. And particularly with the cost benefit analysis for IRB, it looks at the 10-year abatement period. And we all know the projects financed by these, the expectation is they're there for decades. And so looking at 10 years is a pretty limited view of that world and the revenues and the activity it would generate, because in year 11, that project's going to pay full property taxes. And then the second thing that, is often pointed out, that the term cost in there, it can be a little bit misleading or a misnomer, because it really assumes that the project's going to proceed whether you approve the incentive or not. And like Bruce said, if you arrive at a true but for, that this project would not happen but for the incentive, if you said no, the project doesn't happen, and that cost just disappears because the project doesn't proceed, there's never any foregone property tax revenue. So the term cost can be a little bit difficult if you have that true but for scenario. So again, that trying not to do the policy aspect, but that's maybe helping frame how you view some of those tools when they come up.
Cheryl, did I see your hand before or no? Yeah, Debbie?
Do we have any kind of a table that would give measurements as to what, what percentage of 100%, 60% defines the people that said they can't build it without tax incentives? Our ability or our vision to have density included in our comprehensive plan and various things around the city. Are there any measurements, or would that work against us if we put measurements in place for how you get a TIF authorized?
So are you saying like by policy, you'd say sort of have a pick your tool and you get X percentage if you do X, Y, and Z at this location, or is that?
I can't see any development project that's come in the last 10 years that would say, no, they couldn't build it without.
Yeah, and let me take a step.
Sure.
Because I know, I think I jokingly said to the mayor the end of last year, because we were having all these people coming forward, and I kept hearing over and over again, the math, it doesn't math without the incentive, right? And so what does math, right? What does math? And I think that gets to the core of a project that we may not want the developer to build, right? So the question is, what are we buying with those public incentives? And so I think, and unless you have other questions for Bruce or Kevin at this point, why don't we kind of move into how we've used TIF and tax abatement? Because I want to highlight some of the things that we've done and how some of the things that we've looked at have changed over the 20 years or so. So Justin, if you'll go, and I'm just going to say up front, I maybe found a document from 10 years ago for Bruce, but I have a bad slide on my 4 that says, why are we talking about complete streets? And that's because I wasn't paying attention when I cut and pasted. But before we talk about the specific projects, what do I want you to take away from tonight? And everybody has said this. It's absolutely true. The developers will never tell you this, but granting incentives is always 100% of the time at the council's discretion. You do not have to say yes. Our job is to help you, to bring you enough information so you can evaluate thoughtfully and carefully and decide whether you want to participate in a project. Every project is evaluated on its own merits. Precedent doesn't matter. We're going to have a situation coming up with Encore where we're going to talk about some of those things, right? Because their phase 1 project had LEED Silver certification and 20% of the units at 60% of AMI to be attainable housing for that 20-year period. They kind of came through the door saying, we just want the same deal, right? And they said that on the first phase 2 project. Well, the phase 2 project isn't necessarily the same deal as phase 1. So we're going to be working through that with them. And we heard that on the first phase of the block project. Well, Millhouse had this, or the lanes had this, and that's absolutely true, right? But that should never make you feel like you're backed into a corner and have to approve those kinds of things. Your city project team, so whether that's staff, Gilmore and Bell, Bruce, sometimes we will use, depending on the complexity, we've moved away as our zoning is kind of matched up with some of the things that we want to do on development projects. We don't necessarily have as much involvement with a land use attorney, but we may bring a land use attorney who at this point is Stinson. And then on the block project, we actually brought in a sustainability consultant. We had a sustainability consultant who worked at Hafer Welker. She's moved on. And so if we feel the need, we have other resources that we can really bring together to create the team that's evaluating the project that comes forward. And our job is to really focus on, and I didn't put this here, but understanding what the current council values and wants to see in terms of development, what is the community value, and we want to focus on minimizing risk, both current, short-term, and long-term risk as it relates to the development of the project. So as we bring things forward, those are some of the things that we'll point out, or pieces that will be component parts of redevelopment agreements. If you need more information as we go through these processes, ask the questions. The more questions you ask, the better equipped we are to be able to address those and bring you the information that you need. And then having doubts or reservations is 100% normal. You may even vote to approve a project and still wonder if you made the right decision. That's 100% normal. So those are my big sort of takeaways. But then I also think it's important sometimes, and I'm going to also apologize up front. I'm trying to create, this is a document that I'm trying to build and create that hasn't existed. So the formatting I'm still playing around with, but basically this, I wanted to just sort of highlight where we're currently using TIF and tax abatement. And I left the Gateway as the lead project on there. There's no current TIF project plan that's approved. It's in a TIF district. And one of the things we didn't talk about tonight is that the city established the Rock Creek District back in 2006. And that basically starts at Roland Drive and goes all the way to Lamar and it roughly follows the creek channel. And the city established that district at the time because of revisions that were made to the FEMA floodplain maps, and it put a significant amount of property into 100-year floodplain. And so the goal there was to create this TIF district to encourage, promote, attract redevelopment within that floodplain and have some additional resources to be able to do that. That was the first TIF year that was established. So in the Gateway District, we do not have an approved project plan. We've had multiple project plans that have been approved through the years. They get revisited over time. But in 2023, when the property went into foreclosure and the city terminated the redevelopment agreement, we also terminated the TIF project plan. So even though that property is still within a TIF district, there's no approved project plan, and any project that would come forward if they wanted to use TIF they wouldn't have to establish the base district, but they would have to have a project plan approved. And even though that district has been in place since 2006, we have never paid out any increment to the developer of that site. Capital Federal Savings Bank is one that was established also back that Rock Creek Redevelopment District. The TIF project plan was adopted in 2010, and it was to build the new Capital Federal used to have a bank building where the transit center sits now, and they relocated and built their new branch bank at the corner of Knoll and Johnson Drive. Although the redevelopment agreement doesn't say this explicitly, this is where some of that institutional knowledge helps sometimes. The TIF incentive was capped at $530,000, which was the estimate of what it was going to cost to underground the utilities at that site. They've never submitted expenses, so we've never reimbursed any expenses under that agreement. The Mission Bowl Rock Creek TIF District 3A is the Lanes project, and I think everybody's familiar. That's redevelopment of the former Mission Bowl site. That's the 176-unit multifamily development, again, within that Rock Creek redevelopment district established in 2026. That TIF project plan was adopted in 2020. And so, and you'll see, let me go back to the Gateway just briefly. So you'll see on the Gateway project, the incentives that were to be provided to the developer in the last plan, including 100% of the ad valorem property tax increment and 55% of the city's general sales tax increment and 90% of the city's 9% transient guest sales tax increment. The first redevelopment agreement for the Gateway, 100% property TIF, 100% sales TIF, 100% CID, general obligation bonds. So you can see, and Bruce could chime in on springing assessments and a whole variety of other things, that the financing for that deal was very complex and convoluted. But you can kind of see on that project, and you'll see as we talk through other future projects, we've really sort of ratcheted down the amount. 100% is not going to the developer on any project that we've done in the last several years. And I don't see that changing. But that's one of those things that has changed and morphed over time. On the lanes, the incentives that are approved in the current development agreement for phase one, so it's a sliding scale. of the property tax increment that's going to the developer. So for the first 5 years, they get 90%, 10% comes to the city, again, to be spent within that TIF district. 85% goes to the developer in years 6 through 10, 80%. So it's 5% sliding down every kind of 5 years, ending the last 5 years of the 20-year period at 75% of the ad valorem taxes. Again, we could use those city funds to make a debt service payment on the Rock Creek Channel improvements. We could make street improvements kind of adjacent to or within the district. But that's where, and I think that question came up earlier this evening, where we want to think about balancing revenue sharing. Do we have enough TIF eligible expenses within that district? And how do we take advantage of those? One of the other things, though, that in order to get the incentives, the developer was required on that project, was required to build to a LEED Silver standard and then provide 20% of the units at 80% of the AMI. So we factored in sustainability and attainable housing as well as revenue sharing on that project.
Laura, this is a bit of an aside, but while you're talking about the uses for the city dollars, do we have a sense of if on the block project, if Broadmoor Park is close enough in terms of?
We've talked a little bit about
improvements
that,
or
but I
not
think we've
TBD?
sort of definitively.
Okay.
The Mission Crossing TIF district, that was really outside of the gateway, kind of our first TIF project. That is Wellstone, Culver's, Chick-fil-A, that strip center over on the west side of town. The base year that was established was 2010. The TIF project plan was adopted in 2010. That included 100%, the developer got 100% of ad valorem property tax and 100% of ad valorem sales tax. So sales tax obviously only applies if it's a mixed use project and you've got a component that's generating sales tax revenue, as this one did. So you've heard us talk through this process that this TIF is actually paid off. It actually paid off in 2025. So it paid off ahead of schedule. And you've heard us talk about 8 years. Part of that is because the clock started ticking in 2010. They didn't actually start generating increment until 2013, and then we paid off in 2025. So we had 3 years on the front end where they didn't earn any money and 5 years on the back end. So that's an example of where we've been able to return a property to the fully to the tax rolls, and that brought significant property tax and sales tax revenue back into not only Mission, but others. But one thing there that I think we forget about is that was an old yearbook manufacturing plant that was there, Herff Jones, for many, many years. One of the requirements that we had, and this is the only development that we've had that has had a real clawback provision, is we wanted the developer to build a residential component. And they said, we can't build residential. There's no way. It just is never going to pencil. So we gave them a certain amount of time within which they needed to build residential on that as a part of that project, or we were going to claw back a portion of those incentives. Lo and behold, they were able to put together the Wellstone component of that, and it's been very, very successful. The other thing, though, that we negotiated is dedication of where Legacy Park is now was part of that parcel that was purchased by the developer. So they gave that corner back to the city and made $100,000 contribution to make improvements to the park. So again, I think one of the things to think about is let's ask for the things that are important to us, right?
Just a quick question while you're going through these. Because of variances on 75%, 100%, some of them have like years attached to it, like this time to this time. Some of them have no years. So like on the TIF district for Mission Crossing, is that 100% of ad valorem property forever?
For 20 years.
20 years.
Yep.
Okay.
So for 20 years, right?
Except it paid off early.
Except it paid off early. Yeah. But that's an example of where we didn't negotiate. We were giving 100% of that. So you can either shorten the TIF term, and we're going to have one. If you look over to the next page, if you look at Mission Trails TIF district, which is the locale. So that was an approved, they're getting 100% of the ad valorem increment off of that project.
For how long?
For the 20 years of the TIF.
So Laura, if it's not specified on your handout, we should assume it's the full 20-year period, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that developer, in Bruce's analysis at that time, the developer, it wasn't going to take 20 years for the developer to hit their TIF eligible expenses. So one of the things that the council can do is say, we don't want to give you a full 20 years, right? We want to give you 17 years or 15 years or whatever the case may be. It's very important for the developer that they have the full 20 years to try to eke out whatever, there. And again, we use caps. And so part of the exchange for that was, in order to get the 100%, they gave us $250,000 upfront. And then we also got 50 parking spaces. So the developer constructed 100% at their expense, all, or dedicated all of the parking on the first level of the garage at the locale as public parking. And so because downtown parking was an issue at the time. So that was something that we negotiated in exchange for letting them have a full 20-year window on the TIF. Silvercrest at Broadmoor TIF district is the one that where the block project is. That is actually a TIF district that was established. And so everything we've talked about, well, Mission Crossing was outside of the Rock Creek TIF district. That district was established in 2017 for a senior living facility. They never actually submitted a project plan, and they actually took that project to Meadowbrook. So it's much larger in size and scale. But that's why that TIF district existed on that property. So Block has come in and now submitted a project plan that was approved in 2025 for their first phase of their project. So they negotiated and the council approved for the first phase, that sliding scale, 90%, 85, 80, and 75. And that covers the 20-year period. All of these projects are pay-as-you-go projects. So we talked a little bit about bonds and pay-as-you-go. They're all being reimbursed on an annual basis or quarterly basis as the increment is generated. On the block project, on the first phase, the developer will make a one-time IRB origination fee, a payment of $350,000 if they achieve lead silver or 2 green globes with very specific criteria that are equivalent to lead silver, or a one-time IRB origination fee of $500,000 if they attain 2 green globes without meeting specific criteria. So again, you can see in recent projects, you've seen the sustainability elements, the attainable housing elements really start to kind of creep in. We do have the 5101 Johnson Drive, which is the old Wild Oats building. That's a little bit unique. I think Justin and I were looking, I think it's 100% of the ad valorem property tax increment, but that's one where you so narrowly defined the business that would, and the use of that, which did not materialize, that will really probably bring forward termination of that TIF project plan.
And Laura, that was one where, because of the nature of the project, you weren't going to see the massive increment like you would on some of these other projects, right?
Particularly for TIF. And there weren't a lot of TIF
eligible costs.
A lot of TIF eligible costs. So that one, and one thing we didn't talk about tonight because it's too much, but on retail projects, we also have community improvement districts, which is another tool that we can use. And we'll talk about those as they're applicable. But that's if you've got Mission Mart Shopping Center has a community improvement district. Mission Crossing, actually, even though the TIF has expired, they still have a community improvement district. The center where Natural Grocers is has exclusively a community improvement district. So if you're generating retail sales tax, there's some other opportunities that can come into play and tools, and that's part of what Bruce talked about. The one that's not on here, and I think Councilmember Chesney referenced, is well, there's two. One, we created a TIF district over on the vacant piece of property that's behind Panera and where Unleashed was. There was a small senior housing, low-income housing tax credit project several years ago that came through there, and I believe we created a TIF district, but obviously that project never materialized. It's not on your list currently. And then the Rock Creek District number 4, which is down here kind of adjacent, the creek area adjacent to where the Millhouse project is. I think we committed up to about 100, I think it was $160,000. That's increment that has generated since 2006 that will be applied specifically to stormwater or sanitary sewer relocation costs associated with that project. And then just a couple of things, the two true tax abatement projects. So we've used the sales tax exemption piece of IRBs almost on every project that we've done, whether or not we've used even any other form of incentive. And I think as Kevin mentioned, that's not unique to Mission. I think it's pretty standard and common for you to see most communities, again, because the majority of the dollars that you're sort of giving away are state sales tax dollars. In terms of tax abatement projects, the two projects that we've done, the Mission Flats project and the Mission Beverly, which is the Millhouse project, the only two tax abatement projects that we've done. Mission Flats is that 3-story, 77-unit apartment building, 1 block north of Johnson Drive at 58th and Knoll. That's a 70%. So they negotiated in 2023 a 70% property tax abatement for 10 years. And they also had a commitment to build to a minimum of 1 green globe and dedicated 10% of the units as attainable housing. They also paid, and this happened at the end of last year because they actually closed on the bonds. But on a tax abatement project, we also have an IRB origination fee. So there was a $60,000 IRB origination fee that has no strings attached to it that came to the city at the time of bond closing. And so we're just holding that.
Laura, how often does the AMI change based on incomes in Johnson County?
Every year we update the chart for average median income.
Thanks.
And then the Millhouse project, and the formatting is really bad on this, so I apologize. So I think everybody's familiar with that, but they actually negotiated a 75% property tax abatement for 10 years. So 75% outside of any extenuating circumstances is the maximum tax abatement that we will provide under our policy. And there are quite a few things that you have to, if you read through that policy, that you need to achieve in order to get to that 75%. And the Millhouse project did not have the attainable housing piece, so they're looking at still minimum 1 green globe, but we also negotiated the sale of Beverly Park. And so it's a total of $500,000 that's coming to the city for the sale of that parkland. $25,000 came last month when we transferred ownership of that, and the balance of that will come when they close on those bonds. So you can kind of see, I hope, that, over the last 20 years, we've used incentives. We've used them differently on every project. It goes back to every project is different. We want to look at each one separately and independently and on its own merits, and how does it align with what we want and or need in our community. So that's kind of a very quick overview. I'll clean up the formatting and send this back out electronically. Yes.
I just want to make one point since we landed on the Millhouse project. I think one thing we didn't really discuss in any of our slides from our presenters was that redevelopment often carries higher costs than new development in an open area. And so, for example, in the Millhouse project, they put together 8 different parcels, and then the utility relocations, et cetera, had a very big price tag that you would not see if you were just building out in a field somewhere, right? So that is a challenge in terms of maybe why we see everyone coming with a handout, because as a general rule, it's more expensive, right?
Yep. Infill, and you'll hear us sometimes talk about infill redevelopment or brownfield, although it doesn't feel, we don't like to think.
Yeah, I don't like brownfields.
I
It
know.
sounds weird.
That's why we say infill development. Yes, it can absolutely be. And one of the things that we found, for example, the Millhouse project is, as our vision plans and zoning code pushes building lines to the street, right? That's not how, and that was one of the big hangups with the Millhouse project. That's not where the water lines are located based on how cities and communities developed, 60, 75 years ago. And so we learned, I think, some things through Millhouse in terms of maybe some additional due diligence that we encourage or will require developers to do to make sure that we don't have those, oops, we've already negotiated our agreement, but now we have these, more significant costs.
Joseph or Wanda? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Cheryl, go ahead. I saw him.
I just have a question, and I think it came up with one of these a while back, is if, like they build it, they do everything that they said, and we have this TIF, and then within 10 years, they sell it to somebody else. Does that TIF still apply to the new buyer or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so sometimes it's interesting, and I think it's natural to feel like we want, and a lot of times the developers will come to us and say, we're here for the long haul, right? We're really invested. And they all say that, right? They all kind of say that. And I think that's true, but I think while we want to evaluate that, I don't think we should necessarily, I think we need to be focused on the financial capacity of the developer to deliver the project that you want out of the gate. And then, but I know there can be some factors around, we negotiate the deal based on the math at the time, right? And then if you sell it and make a tremendous profit, was it necessary? So those are challenges. We know they come up. We'll talk about those things. But yes, those things carry forward, and those obligations carry forward should they sell a project.
Yeah, and I would say that is one consideration we've talked about as we're negotiating is developers are, of course, keen to come back if costs change disfavorably to them, but they never come back to offer more money back to us if things turn out to pencil better than they thought in the first place, which is why we have Bruce and his team actually, running the check on the numbers, because it always seems like the number that the developers tell us they need in the first instance is not what actually turns out to be the number.
And we're going to talk about that. So not only do we have the Encore project, but you also have Sunflower, who has come back and asked, because of some of the dynamics of the deal on the lanes, for an increase in the TIF cap that was established. So you heard, I think Kevin referenced that we do establish a TIF cap on the project. So not only can you establish that TIF cap, which is something that we haven't done historically on all the projects, but you can also, in the budget and within their TIF eligible costs, you can exclude categories that you're willing to contribute to. So just because they give you this laundry list of everything that's a TIF eligible expense, and we did that very specifically with the Gateway. We'll pay, we'll reimburse land acquisition costs, demolition costs, but some of the other things, interest carry costs, because of the length of time that a project had gone on, were excluded over time. So we don't have to pay for everything that's a TIF eligible cost either.
Yeah, I thought I saw a hand down here. Was it Wanda? Did you have a question? Yeah.
I do have 2 questions. One is, it's my understanding that from listening to you, that even though there's a TIF district, it doesn't mean that a developer automatically gets a TIF district.
That's correct. They have to submit the project plan. They have to go through the whole financial analysis, and then you all have to approve their project plan and a redevelopment agreement. And so the redevelopment agreement is the contract between the city and the developer that would grant them or give them access to the incentive.
Okay, and the second question is that money that never was given to the bank, what did we do with that money?
It's sitting in the bank, and as I've been working on this project in our bank, it's sitting at our bank. That we need to make some decisions about that, because we're about to hit the 20-year project plan expiration on that. So I actually had some questions that I jotted down for myself to follow up on to figure out what we do.
Yeah, so that means that the 20-year, they can come back on us until the 20-year time.
Mm-hmm. They could submit, I believe they can submit expenses, right? They could still, as long as the project.
In the redevelopment agreement, it limits the time.
I don't think that. Yeah, I drug that one out, but I don't think there's any limit on that. And so, we can either wait and but those dollars wouldn't come to us. They would be returned to the other taxing jurisdictions. We would get whatever portion is ours of the increment, but the rest of them would go back to the other
taxing. We have to wait till 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Depending on how you structure, but on that one, I don't think we put a time limit on that redevelopment agreement. Within the 20, as long as up to 20-year period.
So you could, for example, say if you thought all the TIF eligible expenses would be in the first 5 years, you could both put a TIF monetary cap and then also put a timeline cap, right? If you
Yeah,
wanted.
and so you haven't done that necessarily with TIF, but if you
Yeah.
think about the Mission Mart CID, you required them in that development agreement to invest X
Yeah.
amount of dollars
X time.
within a certain, kind of the first 3 to 5 years, I
Yeah.
believe, so that you saw that investment up front, even though the CID period extends over 22 years.
Yeah.
So you can, there's a lot of flexibility in that.
Yeah,
Who's
Debbie?
actually sitting down and establishing these thresholds and percentages? Who start, do you come up with a standard and then go back to do you go back and forth? Who starts this?
Oh, yes.
Well, I mean, how do you start? How does one get 75% and one get 50? And how are you coming up with that strategic formula?
Well, under the tax abatement, under the tax abatement policy, if you meet some of the base criteria, you hit it's like a 45% abatement. And then in order to have anything above 45%, there's several criteria. So it could be attainable housing, it could be sustainability, it could be a specific area or part of town where you want to really encourage investment. So you can kind of buy up in certain percentages there. So we look at and think about how does the project tick the boxes in those sort of categories. And I think we do some similar things. We sort of learn and listen as we go along as a staff and as the team. What is the council value? What are you looking for? What are the mechanics of the deal? What are the finances of the deal look like? And then we just kind of,
So are you including Bruce?
it's Bruce, it's Kevin, it's me, it's Brian, it's Justin,
Okay.
it's Chanel, if we need to involve a land use attorney. So there's a lot of redlining and drafts and sitting in rooms. Right now, for example, Bruce is working and he is kind of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. So he has access to a lot more of the financial information and will often sign a non-disclosure agreement or of some sort. So he's really diving into the project pro formas and testing the assumptions and doing a lot of those things that you heard. And then honestly, on the staff side, we spend a lot of time talking with developers about, which is why we bring them back in front of you, because we spend a lot of time trying to communicate what the council values. And sometimes unless they hear it from you, they don't hear it from us. It kind of falls on deaf ears. So
Thank you.
Yeah. And Bruce is kind of running preliminary checks right along the way, like as we talk about that but-for case, and the original numbers that they present always seem to magically be higher in terms of what they say is needed than when Bruce dials down says is actually needed, and then somehow they make the project work with that number.
it's like any negotiation.
Yeah.
Not my favorite thing.
Well, any developer that has their act together is not going to bring a plan that doesn't roughly meet the but-for analysis if they don't want to just get chased out of the house. So.
Yep. Anyway, I know we ran long this evening. I hope this was helpful. Again, no such thing as a dumb question as we go through any of these. So the next opportunity we'll be together to talk about this will be a work session ahead of your April 15th city council meeting. Bruce will be here in person, and we will begin sort of talking through kind of his first look at an analysis of the pro forma for the Encore project. That we still will have another month before you have to potentially, you have your public hearing on the TIF project plan. But we want to give you that first look of kind of what this looks like, talk about what should or shouldn't be the same or different from their first project, and just have that opportunity to have some of those conversations. So I think that's all we have for you tonight, which is more than enough.
All right. Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the team.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Bruce.
Bye.